Welcome back, Life Science learners. So in this session, we're going to look at the enhanced greenhouse effect. Just to recap, in the previous section, we looked at the human impact, we looked at some of the greenhouse gases and their effect on the atmosphere. Let's look at what happens when we talk about an enhanced greenhouse effect. Is this natural? How different is this from the natural greenhouse effect? Let's spend some time unpacking that concept now. Cool. So when we talk about the enhanced greenhouse effect, we're essentially talking about something that is not natural. We did discuss the greenhouse effect in this previous segment. Now we're looking at what happens when this greenhouse effect is increased unnaturally. So we talk about the effect that emissions have had. What does these emissions do in terms of to the atmosphere? Does it increase the thickness of the gases surrounding the atmosphere? Well, that's what we need to unpack. And that effect we're going to look at now. So the disruption of Earth's climate equilibrium, which is the balance that we talk about, is caused by an increased concentration of the greenhouse gases. And this has led to an increase in the global average surface temperatures. This process is called the enhanced greenhouse effect. Now let's try and understand what these statements mean. So we talked about the greenhouse effect being a natural phenomenon, and this is important in maintaining the global average temperature on Earth. However, we're seeing now, because of the emissions of greenhouse gases, and that have created a significantly larger proportion of these that than are naturally found, this effect has increased the global average temperature. So we refer to this as the enhanced greenhouse effect. So let's try and look at this as a comparison between the natural process and here the process that is enhanced. So when we look at the Earth, as we discussed earlier on, the Earth's radiation or solar radiation is going to be reflected off the surface of the Earth. Some of that escapes back into the space, but some of that is then reflected back onto the surface of this layer of atmosphere. And that results in the temperature on the surface of the Earth actually warming the Earth up, making it more inhabitable, making it more conducive for all forms of life to exist. However, on this side, we see what we call the enhanced greenhouse effect. And crucial to that is the impact that humans have had on this. So this is not a natural phenomenon, but this is as a result of human activity. So as we look at the sun, it continues to provide the solar radiation. However, due to human activity, we see that this layer of atmosphere has become more dense. There are more greenhouse gases as indicated. And this forms a reflective surface. So now we see that, again, as naturally would occur, there's a lot of heat that is reflected back into the atmosphere, with some of it being lost and escaping into space. However, we're seeing that there is more reflected and re-emitted back into the surface. So the temperature on the surface of the Earth now increases further, higher than it has been in the past couple centuries. And we refer to this as the enhanced greenhouse effect, which we'll talk about when we start looking at the impact that that has. So what is responsible for all of this? So we talk about increased carbon dioxide emissions. So carbon dioxide makes up a vast majority of the greenhouse gases that are emitted. But a small amount of methane, which is CH4, and nitrous oxide are also emitted, and these come from industries. These gases are released during the combustion of fossil fuels, such as coal, oil, and natural gas, to produce electricity. We know that our electricity is driven by accessing energy stored in these fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gases. And that has an effect on in the production of increased carbon dioxide emissions, as well as your methane and nitrous oxide. The world emits 48% more carbon dioxide from the consumption of energy now than it did in 1992. So guys, that's not a long time ago. To think about almost a 50% increase since 1992 has a significant impact. South Africa is the 12th largest emitter of CO2 in the world, and it's amongst the largest in Africa. So if we were to look at the comparisons of different countries and the impact that they have had in terms of the emissions, we would need to consider where we are in the context of a powerhouse in Africa. And South Africa is probably amongst the top 1 or 2 countries that are emitting lots of carbon dioxide. And this is not a good thing. It's certainly not where we want to be top in. This is some area that we need to work on. And let's see, in the context of the globe, where are we with this? So if we were to look at globally, and this graph illustrates a combination of several other countries, but we also see some of the giants in the world that have contributed to this. We've got China, we've got the United States, we've looked at India, we're looking at Japan, Russia. And then these are being compared to over a period from 1970 to 2010. And so we're seeing that earlier on in the 1970s, we had measured, and there was records of the emission of these carbon dioxide that's produced from fossil fuels. And we can see that there's been a steady but drastic increase in the production of these. And some countries, for example, China, has produced a significantly larger amount of carbon dioxide from these fossil fuels. Again, a country that is driven by industrial processes, and hence you can see that these have resulted in a significant increase in the carbon dioxide production. If we looked at a country, say for example India, it's an emerging economy. Here you can see a steady and a gradual increase in the amount of carbon dioxide being produced. So this points to specifically how over the last 60, 70 years there's been a radical increase in the carbon dioxide production. Actually, more precisely, from the 1970s, if we look at that, we can see globally that the production has increased in most of our countries. What is interesting is looking at the combination of the European Union and how their efforts to reduce their carbon dioxide emission has kind of been significant in terms of reduction. And this talks to the processes and the industrial processes that have been introduced by various countries. And there have been various protocols and international agreements that countries have taken together in an initiative to try and reduce their carbon dioxide production globally throughout the next 20, 25, 30 years. And this is part of protecting the impact that we as humans have and the industrial processes that we carry out to sustain our living. And that impact is trying to be reviewed. And it talks about the mechanisms that we use to produce energy. We now need to look at alternative energy sources, not because we're running out of fossil fuels, but also the impact that using our fossil fuels has on the future of the earth. And guys, so this is a significant impact that we talk about in terms of not just humans, but activities that humans carry out to sustain human existence on the planet that we currently reside on. So, the main sources of carbon dioxide emissions are fossil fuels, land use changes, and industrial processes. And if you look at the combination of these, some of our powerhouses in terms of the global context of that drive the economies of their countries are being supported by industries. And these industries, including the use of land for agriculture, are driving this emission or this increased emission carbon dioxide globally. Right. So the main sources of these emissions are from natural sources, are generally the atmosphere. The ocean atmosphere exchanges a lot of these gases. Your plant and animal respiration, but you also know that there are microorganisms that produce some of these during respiration and decomposition. So naturally we do have carbon dioxide being emitted. However, I pointed to what humans have been contributing. Okay. There's also methane emissions that we spoke about, and this is emitted during the production and the transport of coal, natural gases, and oil. Methane emission is also a result from livestock production, as well as agricultural processes, by the decay of organic waste in municipal solid waste landfills. All of these collectively contribute to an increased production of methane. So we also have been monitoring methane production globally, and we see that the production of methane, along with carbon dioxide, has also contributed to an increase in global production of your greenhouse gases. Let's spend some time looking at what is carbon footprint. Guys, I'm sure this is a term that you would have heard about in terms of the impact that carbon has on the earth. The carbon footprint is a concept that has been kind of developed in terms of being able to monitor the impact that carbon dioxide has on the environment. And so we can measure the amount of carbon dioxide produced by different activities. So let's try and unpack what carbon footprint is. So a carbon footprint is the total greenhouse gases which are emitted by an individual, an event, an organization, or a product, and that is expressed as the carbon dioxide equivalent. So if we were to measure the carbon dioxide or the carbon footprint of an individual, we would need to consider what is it that this individual does throughout his day or life that causes the emissions of carbon dioxide. So for example, for me to have got here today, I've had to drive to this place. And so that means that using a motor vehicle has allowed me to get here. But in that process, I would have produced a lot of carbon dioxide that was given off into the atmosphere. However, if I chose to walk or cycle to this venue, I would have probably not produced as much carbon dioxide in terms of being produced from the motor vehicle. So I would have definitely probably respired and exhaled a lot of carbon dioxide. I would have been here tired, but I would have reduced my carbon footprint. So that is essentially a measure of the amount of carbon dioxide produced by human activity. We also need to consider that this carbon footprint has a multi-pronged approach in terms of looking at industries like the aviation industry, looking at logistics, looking at public transport. So when we talk about clubbing together of cars or cycling to work or trying to use alternative ways of moving around, we're obviously thinking about the emissions that we have from our movements from one point to another in terms of reducing our carbon footprint. So your carbon footprint is a very powerful tool for understanding the impact of your lifestyle on global warming. So it's important that we look at how we can calculate our carbon footprint. So the best way to calculate the carbon footprint emission is based on the fuel consumption. The table below shows the most common fuels used and the amounts of carbon dioxide released per liter. So if we look at petrol, which again is what is used in most automotive industries, the amount of carbon dioxide that is released there is 2.3 kilograms per liter of fuel consumed. Diesel has a 2.7 liter kilograms of carbon dioxide produced per liter, and oil for heating produces 3 kilograms per liter. And if you look at these are the three significant fossil fuels that drive the automotive industry, that drive the aviation industry, that also are responsible for industrial processes. So we use oil, we use diesel and petrol to drive our machines, and so these contribute significantly to the greenhouse gases. Your carbon footprint mainly depends on the following: the amount of energy you use to heat your home, the use of electricity and electronic equipment, and your daily transport. How often you use air transport is also a factor that contributes to that. So if you're a businessman, or if you are flying often and drive to school every day, you're going to be using a lot of fossil fuels to get you from point A to B. However, if you walk and if you use a shared motor vehicle or public transport, your impact is significantly reduced because you are now sharing that with other individuals that have a common interest in terms of their reduction on global carbon dioxide production. So this is an image that basically shows you the various activities that actually cause or have an impact on our carbon footprint. And essentially it's the waste that we produce, it's transport, it's electricity, it's the fossil fuels that we use, it's the burning of gases to produce heating. What is important is in all of this, to offset that, we need to recycle, reduce and reuse. And those are significant in having an impact on reducing our carbon footprint on the environment. And this little graph that I have here shows you a comparison again of the annual fossil fuel carbon dioxide emissions from various different countries that have been projected up until 2019. And so here, if you look at in the 1960s, we can see that the carbon dioxide footprint and the emissions of these were significantly low. Again, through the years, we can see if we were to extrapolate that as a collective for all these different countries, we can see that it has significantly increased. Amongst them, again, we see that China has been a significant contributor to the fossil emissions produced by these countries. If we look at collectively, all the other countries, although significant, have smaller roles in this. So yes, we might not be a significant contributor like China. However, we do contribute collectively to other countries contributing to this increase. So guys, we've looked at our graph that shows it. I think on my shoulder, you will see at the back the impact that we have. And so it's important for us to recognize what we as individuals can do in terms of trying to reduce our carbon footprint. So I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to unwind, get some water, reflect on what is it that we have had an impact on in terms of the nature and environment that we live in, and let's see how we can remediate that probably in terms of our actions. So guys, rehydrate, have a little stretch, come back after the break. See you now.